Ideas for Impact, a new podcast where innovation meets sustainability head on. Let's take a fresh look at how we do business. Changemakers are innovating solutions to some of the toughest challenges we face in our world. In the process, they are creating their own mark on industry. Our guests are rebels with a cause. They are tearing down barriers, redefining success, and leaving a mark on their industries. Our guests are the disruptors who refuse to settle for business as usual. Join us to unravel the lessons learned behind their failures and their triumphs and uncover the hidden opportunities for positive change. Co-hosted by me, Joanna Buczkowska-McCumber, and my friend, Deborah Host. What if the future of fishing isn't just about catching more, but about seeing more? Amanda Barney, CEO of Teem.fish, is leading a revolution beneath the surface. From her early days on the docks of Newfoundland to the cutting edge of fisheries innovation, Amanda's journey is driven by a true passion for data, equity, and sustainable oceans. Teem.fish's real-time electronic monitoring systems are reshaping the fishing industry, improving safety, ensuring compliance, and empowering both the regulators and the fishers. Amanda shares why building equitable regulations for Indigenous and coastal communities matters, and why acknowledging the true cost of high-quality, accountable fishing is truly critical to a thriving ocean economy. Hello, Amanda. Super excited to have you on Ideas for Impact today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here with you folks.
Well, let's get started. Would love for our listeners to learn a little bit more about you and this journey that has been Teem.fish. I'd love for you to share the tidbits of your own origin story and then also the origin story of Teem.fish.
Sure. And I will do this as succinctly as possible. So even though you have to listen hard for it, I'm actually a Newfoundlander. I was born and raised in Newfoundland. And I came of age in the 90s, which is when the cod moratorium happened in Newfoundland. So I was a kid in St. John's watching in the years leading up to the cod moratorium, which for those folks who don't live and breathe fisheries is when there was a complete complete stop of the commercial cod fishery in Newfoundland, which is really the cornerstone of the economy there. And watching the inshore fishermen in the years leading up to the moratorium protest and really say, hey, something's going on. This fishery is changing. Radical changes to the offshore fishery were not made. There was a collapse. I'm simplifying it. So any Newfoundlanders listening who think I've misrepresented it, I apologize. But it really shocked me because I have these very clear memories of being a little kid around the bay and just seeing so much fish. Like on clear days, you can just see down into the water and just seeing schools of codfish underneath the dory and just I couldn't believe that there was kind of none left. And it was sort of this thread that has followed me my whole life. And so then I was like, oh, well, maybe eventually I could be like DFO's fisheries minister and I could do that. And then went to university, did my undergraduate degree in marine biology and math and stats, kind of quickly got disillusioned with whether or not you can impact communities as a policy worker. So then I went and lived in Alaska and I worked on board commercial fishing vessels. So doing observer work and collecting information on commercial fishing vessels. Then I ended up in Seattle working for a maritime lawyer, eventually got my master's in something called marine affairs, looking at policy analysis, fisheries economics, community economic development. And I was continuing to push and ask the question, how could that many fish be mismanaged? And how could that resource go away when you had members of the communities and the fishermen who were saying something's changing, be raising the flag for a number of years and it still not be done correctly? And it was the question that I asked myself over and over again. And, I approached it as a scientist. I approached it as a statistician, the legal side, the policy side. And what came to the surface was, it's data. It's good information. If you don't have complete good information to make decisions with, then you're operating in the blind. And then I left Washington State. I moved back to Canada. I got offered a job with a charity called EcoTrust Canada, moved sight unseen to Prince Rupert, where 12 years later I still live. And that was working with an electronic monitoring program that was working with the Area A Dungeness crab fishery here. And it introduced me to a data collection tool that really had me nerding out because, I was like, wow, this is easier to scale than humans. It doesn't do everything that a human observer does, but it can work all day and work all night. And it can collect more information for less cost if a program is designed well. And I saw the way that it empowered the commercial fishermen to engage in conversation with DFO about the resource health that the fishermen were paying for this data. So they had to have a seat at the table when they were talking about resource health. And then they could still completely fight with each other about resource allocation. But at least there was like a level ground based on like third party collected verifiable data. And so with EcoTrust, I was like, could this technology be used in more fisheries? And I worked with EcoTrust for about 7 years. So that was, that's kind of my origin story. I'm just a kid from Newfoundland who basically was like, why the fuck aren't there any cod left? Because there were so many. And it just drove me to ask that question over and over again from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And then I found myself in a position where I was like, this is a really interesting data collection tool that maybe could help fill data deserts that exist in the oceans. I mean, we don't really know what's going on and there's a lot of extrapolation. So like, could this tool be an effective way to learn more about the ocean and create a forum under which normally very polarized parties would be forced to listen to each other because they're using the same information to have a discussion. So all of my nerd boxes were checked when electronic monitoring first was introduced to me. And then over the course of working for EcoTrust for several years and setting up some R&D projects with electronic monitoring and other fisheries, can this work? Not just on a crab boat, but could this work on a trawl vessel? Could this work on longliners? Could it work in smaller boats that have different data needs? We found that the answer was usually yes. And you had to work hard to figure out how to make it cost effective. And in the early days, before cloud storage, before AI, before data transmission, the logistics sometimes made it expensive. So really through EcoTrust operating as a charity, continually asking the question, how do you actually make it cost effective? How do you make this not a burden for the commercial fishermen that have to pay for it and a really useful tool for the regulators? And so after about 7 years, we had done so much R&D that there was really a commercially viable product and service delivery. And the charity's like, we can't do commercial work. So EcoTrust Canada launched Teem.fish in 2019. I was named the founding CEO. And over the last 6 years or 5.5 years, we've continued to do work around the world. And really, it's been a bit of a traveling roadshow up until last year of going to regulators and fisheries around the world and saying, consider this in your regulatory strategy over the next few years. This is a great tool. We're not trying to replace observers. We can augment the work that we do. Observers that are in danger because they're reporting out on things that people don't want them to see. Suddenly they can do pure biological data collection, and your camera can be, the tool that's ratting people out, for lack of a better way to describe it. And so working really hard to kind of inform regulators around the world with my competitors that this is a really viable, useful tool. And what we've seen in 2025 is regulators all over the world saying, yeah, let's fully implement this. So we're suddenly in the opening, I don't know what the right metaphor is. We're in the first 100 yards of a scaling marathon that is insane. And we're now in a position to say, how are we innovating? How are we integrating edge and cloud-based AI so that the massive amount of video and sensor data that we're going to be collecting over the next few years, how do we analyze it more quickly? What is the power of the data? How do we, as Teem.fish, hold ourselves accountable to continuing to not just want to meet regulatory check boxes, but how are we creating conversations built on data equity, and how are we supporting the communities that rely on fisheries resources? So I've said a lot. It's a wild thing that's happened over the last 6 years. And I come at the problem really honestly, with a huge amount of curiosity. And like every time I talk about it, it makes me cry. Like I never want to see what happened to Newfoundland happen somewhere else, because our economy was fucked and people were broken, and like the spirit of the place went away, and it didn't need to happen. I haven't cried about it in a long time, but like the part you can edit out now is like, I'm just having a crazy period, so I'm extra emotional. But like, but this is
like, yeah. It's like big, I think you're working on really big global challenges, right? That like, of course, you saw the effects in your own hometown of like how that can actually have an impact beyond just like statistics or numbers. Like that has real effects on the environment and on communities and on people's livelihoods. And that's interesting. Like that's real. And to that point of like, we're on this like precipice of something that's like really scaling. A mentor of mine always talked about, when do you jump onto a trend or new technology? It's like, when you think about it as like this wave or an ocean wave starting, like you get on it at the beginning and you sort of start riding like as it grows and grows. And that's the opportunity. You don't jump on when it's like huge and scalable. The interesting journey is from the beginning. And I feel like you've been there since that beginning of that wave building. And I know we've talked a lot about like, okay, like we're transitioning to building like not just a company, but this is a tech company, right? Like I know you and I have had conversations about this. And so like, I think for me, the question that I would love for you to perhaps think about or answer for us is, like we talk about, you talk about like Teem.fish as a systems change tool. And it's not just like, you're not just building a tech company, you're building like a systems change solution. What does that mean in actual practice for you?
It's twofold, I think. And maybe as I answer it, it's more than two. So part of it, if I go really nerdy, is I think about the management tools that were used back in the 90s. So that's really, it's a lot of single stock assessment. So let's monitor a stock of fish in isolation from the environment around it and maybe the other species like the food chain, which we have seen over time. Management has moved towards something called ecosystem-based management, where you're kind of looking at all the interactions at play, which makes sense because a fish stock in the ocean is not in isolation of its ecosystem. So there was this existing system change within fisheries management towards economic models based on maximum sustainable yield and single stock assessment to this more holistic approach to managing fisheries. But there's still really big like silos around how bureaucracies are making decisions, like ecosystem decisions. So, and even though they talked about ecosystem-based management, you weren't using the way that data sets are integrated, the way that people were looking at the way things interacted. It didn't seem to be happening in real time. And it's a hard data collection problem to solve, especially if you have like long-standing paid for ways that you collect information. So part of what we're trying to do is just say, let's do stock assessment in a different way. Let's bring predictive modeling into stock assessment. Let's include weather and climate information in these stock assessments. And, nothing that I'm saying is groundbreaking. I know that fisheries scientists and managers are considering all of this, but they might not necessarily have the nimbleness inside of bureaucracies to think about integrating data sets and then having the ability to run models on this data and consider, like, if the ocean gets X degrees warmer, how is that impacting fish species? Are they going to move? And then, you live in Victoria and you have a license to fish a certain fish and it doesn't go to Victoria anymore. It's coming up to Prince Rupert. So part of what we want to do is maybe not force these regulatory bodies to change the way they are doing stuff because it's a slow process, but just say, you know what? I think we're just going to start providing this information and doing our own modeling. And it's not a wild thing to consider because of where we've gotten with model development and the data that we hold. So I think one of the ways that we're changing the system is like, we collect data on behalf of fishermen. We provide data sets to regulators, but we also are holding a bunch of this information in trust. And we have the great privilege of working with several different Indigenous nations. And so we're saying, how about instead of just handing data over, how can we help you do your own analysis and answer some of these questions on your own and not wait for the government to answer it because their wheels might spin a little slower. So part of it is just saying, we can't wait for you to tell us about our resource because we can actually use the data to answer some of our own questions. So part of it is like, let's just be empowered. Even if we're not allowed to make the management decisions on our own, let's be empowered to like do our own investigation. And the data sets a lot of times are shared. So that information can be shared. So just this idea that a federal government can manage a resource well for every single community in the country they represent. How about other people are considering at a community level? Like, let's change the scale at which we consider who's managing a resource. And also the idea that like you manage a natural resource. No, you dance with it. You live with it. You're inside of the system with that resource. So how about you don't manage it? How about you like coexist with it? So I think that's part of the system change is natural resources are not commodities. They're natural resources. Let's live inside the system with that resource and figure out how to be able to coexist with it and, eat fish for a long time. And then the other thing is that markets have always, unfortunately, incentivized quantity over quality. So we look at the changes in some of the things that have happened in BC over the years and sort of one person owning a whole bunch of salmon quota and basically saying, I'm going to pay you, 20 cents a pound for sockeye that I'm going to can and sell for way more. And so people are incentivized to catch a lot of fish because they're getting paid so little for the amount of fish. And so how do we lean on the work of big seafood buyers like Walmart and like Tesco in the UK who are saying, we want sustainably sourced seafood and say, okay, then pay for it. Then how do we, if the primary producer is getting paid 20 cents a pound for sockeye, but you're going to the store and you're paying $30 a pound for it, like who's making all that money in the middle? And how can we shift it so that the primary producer is getting paid a lot more money for high quality product? So they can actually make the same amount or more money by catching less fish. So let's incentivize folks to catch less fish and have it be higher quality, traceable, a better product. And I really think there's so much room for that in how seafood is bought and processed. And some examples is some of the fisheries that we've worked with in the Indian Ocean. If they get something called a yellow card, then their tuna is deemed sort of not fully sustainable. So they get a lower price. And so there's some fisheries where if they're getting that lower price, then they're going to bring in some lower quality fish. So some of the tuna, they might be like, what if I catch 6 big tuna instead of 4, 2 of them are not going to be in great shape by the time I come in from my trip. They might get made into fish meal, but at least I get a little bit more money. And how do you say, no, let's put some monitoring on these boats. Let's get rid of their yellow card so they get the higher price for the tuna. And then they only need to land 4. They don't need to extend their trip and let some of the catch from the first day rot and sell it for dog food. They're only going to catch 4 fish and it's all going to be high quality. And so that's the other thing that I want to change is that can we incentivize these primary producers, these fisher folk around the world? Can we incentivize them to be like, catch less fish of a higher quality? Let's stop creating a market where it's better for you to overfish because you need bulk as opposed to high quality product. And so how can monitoring married to traceability with certifications and with support from some of these massive seafood buyers create a market where a fisherman can catch less? And so you actually are putting less pressure on the resource and you're rewarding the really good actors. And so that's the other way I don't just want to change how we think about the fish in the sea, but how do we actually recognize the value of what's being caught and have more of that value going to the person catching it than getting lost somewhere in the middle,
Let's talk about funding systems. So like what you're describing is multi-complex global challenges as it pertains to fisheries management, traceability, and you're even getting into like market and data and what the economy wants versus what it can support and how, and like to conservation. So let's pinpoint, if you could do one thing and do it really well, one part of this whole ecosystem, where do you think that should be today?
Where Teem.fish should focus today?
Yeah, or just I mean, Teem.fish, it sounds like has multi layers, and to just focus in on one may not be the most effective. But if I were to get into this space today, where should I spend all my time and energy focusing, knowing that the funding system as it pertains to fisheries and management of fisheries is so complex? Where should I focus all of my efforts and energy to have the biggest impact?
That's a wild question. That's really good. Where can you create accountability? So I think and it's biased because it's the work that I do, but I think it's like something like working towards creating a monitoring policy and a type of monitoring that is verifiable. And so you can hold a company and a fishing vessel accountable to their actions because you can go back, you can check the tape. And then based on the data that you're collecting, you can then hold a government accountable to saying, like, we're collecting this data, like, how is your management changing or not changing? Like, this information is now available to you. Why are you still using your old model? So like, and then, MSC, you said you want a fishery to be sustainable. Well, this monitoring is your benchmark of sustainability. So now it is sustainable. So what does your certification actually mean? So I think focusing on a data set or a data collection methodology that creates verifiable, like you can verify it. So it holds a whole bunch of people accountable. I think that's what you focus on, whether that's monitoring on vessels, whether that's creating monitoring at fish plants. Like, I think the places where you can get a third party to do something that has these like accountability tendrils out to like a bunch of the different players in the system, that's where I would focus. And some of the work that's happening, like some of the human rights work that's happening around how do you create monitoring and accountability around human rights is very separate from what we do, but it's very similar. How do you go into some of these massive boats that have major human rights violations and major concerns around labor, but also fishing practices? You know, it's not going to be Teem.fish because we're not social scientists. I don't know how to even touch that level of human rights violation without creating more problems. But is there someone else that's like, there's other groups like Conservation International, they're trying to tackle that. So this is another way that they're trying to, as a third party, come in and hold people accountable with a data set or with a methodology that can be audited. So it creates a ripple effect of accountability across a whole bunch of players in the system. How's that for an answer? Like, try.
It's good. No, I think accountability and transparency is key. Yeah. I think it's extremely important to mandate because the waters that we speak of don't have the same borders as the countries that we live in. And in order to have this cross-cultural exchange and understanding of how we want to manage a resource that we all need to work together and share is very difficult. And if we can put in systems and structures that everyone can agree to, because it means, similar to your initial story of Newfoundland and waters and what you experienced growing up, I think if we can all agree that we need this resource because it is an economic feature that we all have to rely on, whether it's because of the way we work or the food we want to consume or just subsistence for the marine environments that need to prevail, I think accountability is probably the right avenue to push forward.
And I think the other part is, if we look at just talking about the sort of why I believe, why I love working in fisheries is it's, there's also like this deep all over the world, like it's just so cultural. Whether you're talking about Indigenous cultures, like even colonizing cultures that were built around fisheries, but like everywhere in the world, if you are on the coast and fishing is part of your economy, then it's also part of your culture. And so it's like, it's not hard to get folks to truly give a shit about making it better. That's poorly articulated, but it's not like you don't have to convince people that this is an important thing to get right. Because if you go to a place where fishing is part of their livelihood, then they're like, yeah, it is an important thing that we have to get right. Convincing a fisherman to put a camera on a boat where they live and work so we can watch what they do, not always the easiest conversation. But being honest and saying, we're not putting this camera on your boat just because we want to like check whether or not you're following the rules. Like, this camera is actually the beginning of the creation of impactful data. And there's ways that you can access this data. And these are the ways that we want this data to do work for you. It's the accountability it creates, which can make people uncomfortable. But the impact that can come from creating that accountability is what I think has made and this pun is intended, like the sea change in the regulatory environment over the last 5 years is just over and over again, me showing up in countries around the world and being like, if you hold people accountable, if we have really good data, good things are going to happen. And so this idea that accountability and reliable data sets does more than prove or disprove something, everyone finally started to get it. It was like, oh, this isn't just a 0 or 1. We're actually creating useful data sets. We're not just confirming or denying something at a point in time, but we're actually, creating a long-term view and allowing ourselves to be proactive to the changes that are coming. And I think the other couple of big drivers for change in at least our ability to access markets, like this regulatory change, COVID, you couldn't move observers between boats. You couldn't put people on boats. So in the fisheries that traditionally were getting these third-party data sets from humans, their data went to 0. You could still run a camera during COVID. And then the other thing is climate change. Is nobody can deny that ocean conditions are changing and that a changing ocean wasn't necessarily built into a forecasting model 50 years ago. There was kind of annual changes, but they weren't building in the fact that like we don't have the Earth is not the same system that it was 50 years ago.
No, wasn't really taking into account all these variables, right? That are becoming reality and have become reality globally, which brings me to the question. And, I think you've talked about, the realities at the local community level, but the work that you do with Teem.fish and I think your ambitions with your business and also where you have shown up is very global in nature. You're like in a fairly remote place in British Columbia as well, in Canada. And so I'm curious to know how like you sort of work with that tension of like being in a local place, but also trying to make global impact, but also build a global company. There's a lot there. And so how do you navigate that and how do you manage that?
Teem.fish grew out of a charity. So we were like, in the early days, we were a very high touch service company that used some technology to collect data. But really in the early days, in the EcoTrust days, it was R&D. It was like, is this going to work on your boat? Let's put some cameras on. Let's figure it out. Let's meet you in your place and figure out if this could work for you. And as we found that electronic monitoring was applicable across lots of different fisheries, we were like, we don't want to come in and pretend to be fisheries experts all over the world. But we now feel really confident that this tech stack can be really impactful. And so we changed, and it started with just changing our mindset. And then it was like changing our website. And now it's changing our growth strategy and like, spoiler alert, the next pivot is like, we're actually a data company. But right now we're still in the tech company pivot. So now it's saying, okay, I truly believe that this is a really useful tech stack. The hardware that we put on vessels, the incredible cameras we built, we have these edge AI capabilities. We have this remote data transmission capabilities. We have an incredible review platform that lives in the cloud. We have data analytics. So we have this great tech stack. I am not going to come to where you live. I'm not going to go to the South Pacific Islands and say, you know what? I know everything about your fisheries. I understand the cultural nuances. I know all your species. I live and breathe your fisheries, because I don't. But who does? Are there existing observer companies? Who are the marine electricians that you work with? What is the trusted network within your fishing community? So I'm not going to come in and try to build trust that has existed for years, but do you have a marine electrician that you work with all the time? Are there observer companies that the government already works with? Are there ex-fishermen who are interested in this? And so actually handing our tech stack to a local network of folks engaged in fisheries. And so working with observer companies is really great because They usually have a level of federal designation. So if you're a data collection company working for the government, you can't just be Johnny with the GoPro. Like, you have to go through this level of certification. They have to trust your data. So you can go in and you can find groups that are already working in fisheries. Is electronic monitoring coming to your fishery? So how can we bring our tech stack to your network? How can we lean on a trusted relationship you might have with the fishing fleet to introduce this technology? And so we are not trying to build Teem.fish offices all over the world and say, let us come and tell you a whole bunch of new stuff about your fishery. We're coming in and saying, this technology could be super impactful here. And it sounds like you're going to have to, it's going to be required. So let's consult with you. Let's figure out if you need 3 cameras or 2 cameras. Let's figure out your system design. Let's customize the software for you. And then it's your tech stack, and you license it from us and you pay us to do tech support and be experts. But so globally, it's like there are local fisheries experts everywhere. So let's sell them our tech stack. And at the same time, let's continue to be stewards of data. Let's continue to have conversations around regional data access. And so we're never going to reveal where one individual person fishes, but are there trends in a fisheries data set that are going to be really helpful to regional management? And so not just going in and selling them a tech stack, but also fostering and generating conversations about how data sets and data can be integrated and shared, so that when I think about the system change we want to create, which is like, can we do fisheries management in a different way? Can we be quicker in identifying trends? Can we start to consider climate impact? That we're not going in and being like, let's sell you some tech and make a little silo for your community and you shoot a little bit of data to the government. But like, could the technology that we're bringing to you be part of a network of fisheries data collection that's happening, across your region? And how do we not only bring in the technology, but start to bring in these conversations around the data impact in a way that's like, fisheries data is sacred. Like, where you fish is private and sacred, and there's no breach of confidentiality. But at sort of a higher level, is your fishery encountering species they've never seen before? And is the fishery next door seeing less fish than they used to? Like, what kind of information can be shared? And so that's really, when we think about creating that global impact, I think that comes from, the DNA of EcoTrust Canada, which was really, can we learn about ideas and then bring those ideas to new places? And so, that concept of, I don't want to come and be an EM company where you live, but can I bring your EM technology to a network that exists and get paid to support you over time for that regulatory checkbox? And then also, can we start to have conversations about data impact and how we're going to build data networks in different regions? So that's how we do it.
How does this work with Indigenous communities along the coast?
That's a great question. And so it's very similar in that we're bringing the technology into different communities. It's a pretty tricky, demoralizing, inspiring, heartbreaking conversation that we get to sometimes be privy to between these nations and DFO around data sovereignty, around interpretations of changes to the Fisheries Act. So from a political point of view, it's wild what we get to be invited in to observe and then sometimes say, hey, maybe there's a tech solution to some of the things that you're talking about. But it is, from a very kind of practical side, it's, we have the Coastal First Nations who are setting up monitoring programs across a bunch of their community-based fisheries this summer. There's parcels of the data that they're collecting that are shared with DFO for sort of the regional management. So, and then there's other parts of the information that are being used by the Guardian Watchman programs that are being used for, nation management. It's really tricky because it's not as simple as like, here's the tech, because, and this might, we might have to cut this, but like my personal view is DFO the regional branches of DFO are not comfortable with so the national level, they were like, nations can manage their own fisheries and they can determine their own monitoring processes. And then there is some data sharing with DFO, but basically, like, you have the right to manage your own fisheries, of course. In practice, it feels like the regions are throwing up every single roadblock possible for the nations bringing in monitoring companies that aren't the old guard that's always there's a couple of companies that have done most of the monitoring in BC for some fisheries, and they built these programs with DFO years and years ago, and DFO is making it really hard for new companies to participate, even though it's kind of illegal to create monopolies. So anyhow, who knows if it's a really tricky question right now, Deborah, because we are living it every single day, and every single day DFO is throwing up new and different blockades. So like what the shit they're pulling with Ha'um, who are rights-based fisheries, and New Chalmette, who have won many court cases, not the same shit they're pulling with the coastal nations. Like it's really fucked up. So I don't know if we can use any of this, because some of what I'm privy to are tier 1 conversations that I'm an observer on, but like, we're going to get it over the line. And it might be interesting 6 months from now to have a follow-up conversation of like, how did your Indigenous trials go this summer? Because they really want to figure out how to not let these nations have the data sovereignty that they claim they're allowed to have. It's hard not to interpret their actions as that, but that's sort of a separate conversation. Trying to think of a way to answer it that can like be used, which is the work we're doing with the Indigenous nations is allowing us to consider how we would solve data sharing and data confidentiality problems that we might face in the high seas. So in high seas fisheries in the Pacific, where you might have a fishing vessel that like is in Tongan waters and then goes to Samoan waters and then goes and delivers in Australia, you're dealing with a bunch of different sovereign owners of certain parcels of the data that's collected on board a vessel. And in working with the Indigenous fisheries in coastal BC, you're facing some of the same problems. Are they doing some food fishing? Are they doing commercial fishing? Does some of that data just belong to that nation? Does some of it need to be shared with DFO for regional management? And so it is not simple, but it's really inspiring to see these groups of nations want to do their own fisheries management, want to think about fisheries policies through the lens of their Indigenous values, and figuring out the tricky ways to create both shared and sovereign data sets, and to do it in a way that is cost effective and impactful, and even doing fun things like considering changes to our hardware technology. How can we make this portable so it's affordable and useful for a fleet of 25 really small vessels that are sharing the commercial allocation that traditionally might have been on one giant boat? And so we also get to be really innovative with them of figuring out, how do you bring a technology that was originally designed for a big boat that makes over $1 million a year? How do you change that technology so that it's affordable and appropriate for 25 small boats that might, only fish for a handful of days of the year, but really want to bring this technology into their fisheries? So it is, like I said, really inspiring, really brain bending, and really, like, personally, I'm really honored to be invited to be the company that's doing the work with these folks, and really grateful for the opportunity to think about fisheries management and data sovereignty in a different way, not from this federal colonial perspective and how do we meet those needs, but actually saying, like, it's a very different reality and we have really different needs. And so can you please run all your ideas about data through the Indigenous lens? And I'll use the word wildly, and it's wild, and it's really great.
That's a good answer. Last question, Amanda. If you only had 30 seconds, only had 30 seconds.
Right.
On the mic at the UN Ocean Conference, what would you say to everybody in the world?
If you refuse to pay people a living wage to catch fish, then why the fuck are you criminalizing them for catching too much fish?
Very good.
Bold.
Yeah. We love it. We love it.
Yeah.
That's not where I thought you were going, but
I think that's the root of the problem.
Yeah. There's such big contradictions, right? Like in all of this, like, and it's so important to bring those up and have conversations about them. And we want to say a huge thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing like your whole story and, you know, your vision and your insights. And I think that your experience is very insightful of like the importance of this work that you're doing, not just in one location, but globally. So we're excited to see where it goes. And like, we're here cheering you on. And so thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah. And if I was wearing my like corporate hat, I'd say to the UN, you need to put more EM systems on boats and you should only buy them from companies run by women. And then they could only buy mine because I'm the only EM company run by a woman. But that's my brain, not my heart. My first answer is my heart.
Yeah, which is good, which is like that tension between like impact and, you know, building a company, right? Like, so I love it. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you both so much. And it's really nice to meet you. It's really nice to see you.
As we wrap up today's episode, we hope you're leaving with insights that ignite a spark within you. At the core of every story we cover lies the undeniable truth. What truly drives impact is the relentless pursuit of change, paired with a deep commitment to the greater good. We're always reminded that making a mark on the world is not an easy task and isn't just about breaking through barriers. It's about thinking differently about what sustainability means in our ever-changing world and what is possible in creating it. Thank you so much for joining us on Ideas for Impact, where rebels with a cause redefine the meaning of what is possible. For more episodes that challenge the norm, follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, always dive deeper into our journey with us at ideasforimpactagency.com. Until next time, friends, keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible.